Talking of joy and mirth, Andrew Eborn joins me this morning because Dr. Rene, very sadly, is in Barbados. I mean, ill. And I send my best wishes and love to you, Rene. Hope you feel better soon. But Andrew, Rene's loss on my loss. You're Ghey.
And Rene for a day.
You're Rene for a day.
I've got her stilettos on and they match my eyes. They are red. And it's glorious. It's such a joy to join you and your brilliant audience. I love your audience. For people tweeting merrily ever since the tragic news of Rene not being here in Barbados.
Well, I've been quite naughty because on Twitter I keep saying she's away in the Maldives or Barbados, but obviously she's not. Actually, she has been very unwell because normally she texts me all the time and actually she's been quite quiet.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it means she is ill.
We do send our love to Rene and her wonderful fans around the world. I love that. And they all sort of say, oh, it's Rene and she's not here. But jolly Andrew Eborn is
well, indeed, the jolly Andrew Eborn is here. Let's move on and talk about world news. It's quite depressing at the moment, isn't it?
Awful.
When when I woke up this morning, we now find out the United States, and we've been talking about this, there have been fears of escalation of the conflict, of what is going on, and the United States dropped more than 125 bombs on Iran's military and its allies in Iraq and on Syria. This is last night, and obviously this is retaliation, isn't it, for the attacks on American troops. US bombers hit more than 85 targets in Iraq and Syria, including sites held by Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Now, this is a series of measures because the American forces have been hit by 160 attacks, and to be fair to Joe Biden, and I was really struck by this, he said, we will retaliate. He said, if you harm an American, we will respond.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is the language of war. But he's also want to be very careful he doesn't escalate completely. And that's why they're trying to say it's very targeted. This is what we're going to try and do as a direct response to this. But people want escalation. This is the problem. In certain forces.
Who wants escalation?
Well, I think they in that sort of area.
But Iran doesn't.
Well, you say that. But certain sort of things, if you bring the whole thing to a head and it becomes a big conflict, for certain factions, that's the problem. So it's a very targeted response. What Joe Biden has said, it's got to be the language of war. You cannot harm somebody without some sort of recompense. Yeah. And this is working on that sort of principle.
And I think also it shows the real human nature of this. 3 American soldiers killed by a drone strike. That was last Sunday, actually. It was. And of course, when you look at their pictures, they are so young.
Yeah, it is horrendous. And we're drowning in a sea of disgusting information every single day with horrendous pictures. And there's a risk of being desensitised until 100%. You personify it.
100%.
And you look at that sort of thing, you see one tragic case, that's one too many.
And I think, you know, it's so confusing for many people, but we've got to remember that Iran backs all of these groups, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, for example, Islamic Jihad. We know that Iran is behind that. Equally, at the same time, I don't think Iran can actually afford for this to escalate.
Yeah, and I think this is why it's the sort of, like I say, there's certain factions that want it to escalate, but I think we need to make sure it is targeted. We're living in a horrible age at the moment where everything's divided. And what I quite like is the anagram of Joe Biden is be joined. So if the world could just follow that advice, it would make sense.
I mean, I wonder what you make of this comment from Donald Trump, because he said we're on the verge of World War III. Of course, he's very good at ramping up the rhetoric. He also said that if he was president, this would never have happened.
And it's interesting.
I kind of believe him.
I've said this before. I love him or loathe him, and I know he is that Marmite character. He is basically got more respect for people like from people like Putin and stuff like that, because he does speak the language, and he is far more. People are a bit more nervous of Donald Trump.
Is it also because it's very difficult to predict Trump, rather like it's incredibly difficult to predict Putin?
Well, I think Trump's actually very predictable. I do. I predicted that he was going to win or get, well, in previous times and so on and so forth. I predict he's going to win again this coming time if he's allowed to stand. It works on that sort of basis. And I think they are scared of him. And because he comes across as this sort of aggressive sort of character and he talks the talk, that's the problem. And we do live in an age where we need to get George or not war.
Yeah, 100%. Let's move to matters closer to home. Obviously, I've been following this very closely. Brianna Ghey's killers and the sentencing that happened yesterday. I watched that sentencing.
Yes.
It lasted 47 minutes, actually, and I thought the judge did a marvellous job, actually, in terms of delivering that sentence. Mrs. Justice Yip. I was really struck again by what she said and the emotion on her face. And I think she explained it incredibly carefully. We know now that the killers were given life sentences, as in her words, for brutal, planned and sadistic murder. Scarlett Jenkinson, Eddie Ratcliffe, they murdered 16-year-old Brianna, which is just, I just can't even comprehend how anyone can be so abhorrent. She was given 22 years. Ratcliffe was detained for 20 years. They showed no visible reaction.
Yeah, I mean, it's an absolutely appalling case, and I think the more that this is unfolded, the more that people realise how abhorrent that has happened. And what's really tragic in this, there are more victims, obviously, the families and so on and so forth. And just to unpack what the courts have said, because they first of all had to decide, are they going to disclose the names of
What did you
those
think of that?
Well, I think that the short answer is that they start off with, say, because they're under the age of 18, when they actually committed this horrendous murder. They were 15 at the time. And the courts normally say, well, you don't disclose it. There has to be a special order. And it's a balance. You have to look, the court needs to determine, well, hang about, what's the effect on the children? What's the effect on their families as a result of it? Balanced against the interest that justice has to be done and seem to be done. And that's the thing. So the courts will take into that sort of fine balance.
So what was the thinking behind naming them?
Well, it's in the public interest that they would do that. And it was a media request, because that's what they wanted to try and work out. The media wanted to find that out, but also to be a deterrent for other people. But the consequences of naming them is not just on those two concerned, but also on their families and so on and so forth.
Indeed. And actually, during that sentencing, Jenkinson's mother was crying. The two defendants showing no emotion at all. Also, just in terms of that, just listening to the detail of that, it was particularly violent, particularly brutal, and she was stabbed 28 times. I mean, that's just barbaric.
Well, it's horrendous, and what's unfolded in evidence is that they're looking at things like the dark web and so on and so forth, which has a lot of this horrendous material.
Do you want to just explain to some of our viewers who won't know what that is? Because we band around this term the whole time. What is the dark web?
So basically there's material out there. The internet's bad enough already, but there are parts of the internet which you can access if you have appropriate. I won't give the name of it because I think it would just encourage people to do that.
It's hidden.
It's hidden. So it's layers upon layers, and it's the most obscene material. You can get all sorts of material and so on and so forth. But it's got horrendous, absolutely shocking videos on that sort of basis. And what's happened is they worked out that she'd been accessing this material and therefore turned around and maybe inspired or whatever. And she did. I think in one of her interviews said she would kill again. She was so thrilled by it.
So my understanding is, and I will ask you this, but just don't answer it specifically. How do you access this dark web? So normally if you go onto a browser like, say, Chrome or indeed Safari, you won't find it.
Yes. No, exactly. So you have to download a particular bit of software, which I'm not going to mention. I know other people in the media have, and then you can access it. And that's the principle. But the reality is don't, because that sort of material is horrendous.
What's the law on that?
Well, it's very simple. The material is illegal, and I think it should be even tougher. We're basically putting the obligation that you should not be able to access it. As soon as people can work out that they're accessing, alarm bells should start ringing.
Just, what did you think of the sentencing? Was it just?
Well, and very simple. What happens, we want to make sure it's the science. In the law, there's been a big debate. TV or not TV has been the question. It happened in July 2022 when Ben Oliver, who murdered or manslaughter of his grandfather, you might remember. It was the very first televised case of the sentencing. In America and various places, we said we're wall-to-wall television of court cases and so on and so forth. In this country, we're just starting to do that. And the idea is exactly as I say, it's about justice not just being done, but being seen to be done. And the reason they unpack the sentencing is there was a lot of things in the newspapers which turn around, just give the headline about, lenient judges or whatever it is, woke judges, they're not. And what happens is the judges said, well, we should explain what the sentencing happens. And there's something called the Sentencing Council, which sets out guidelines. And it says, look, here's the tariff, if you like. If you commit this offence, and you start off saying, look, this is the minimum, and then you take in what's called aggravating circumstances, which would increase the sentence, and mitigating circumstances, which would reduce it. So this particular murder, what they were saying is because they were both under 18, the minimum starts at 12 years.
Right.
12 years. Then they hear the evidence about aggravating circumstances like mental illness and so on and so forth, where premeditated, where they came with a knife and so on and so forth, and all that then adds to it, which is why they got the sentences they eventually got.
And actually, she said, in terms of it would be a matter for the parole board, because essentially she was saying, I don't know whether you can be rehabilitated going forward.
And that's the question. It's always about the safety of the public. This is a life sentence. It is for life. But what happens is it can be a whole life sentence, which means you'll never get out, or they can do what's a term, effectively saying that this is the minimum term before you can be considered for parole. But it's not automatic. You have to come before the parole board, and they make sure that the safety of the public is paramount.
Let me just ask you at home what your thoughts are. What did you think of that sentencing? I'm very torn on that, 22 years, 20 years. But also, it's a crime of such barbaric proportions, actually. A young girl taken away with her whole life ahead of her, devastating not only her family, but devastating the lives of the families of the perpetrators as well. What do you think the punishment should have been? And we go back to that question, you know, should we bring back the death penalty? Now, obviously, they were underage at that point, and I don't know when you then decide the age of criminal responsibility. I know the law is fairly clear on that. Let us know your thoughts, please. 0344 499 1000. Text the word talk in your message to 87222. Also, you can tweet us at Talk TV, then leave a space, hashtag Breakfast Doctors. I've got to tell Andrew how to actually man those messages coming in. Talking of extraordinary stories, the manhunt continues.
Yeah, and I find this extraordinary. I mean, the last sighting was on Wednesday, going south on whatever line it was. We live in a country where we're probably photographed
well, he was seen
and
at King's
filmed.
Cross Underground Station.
Exactly, and he was going south, and that on the tube, which was that sort of principle. And they've got that horrendous picture of him, so people would have seen him with that horrific injury, so very visible. But we have cameras every yard that we take. We're photographed and filmed more than any country in the world.
We have more surveillance than any other capital anywhere in the world per square mile.
Absolutely. So I don't understand how he can go below the radar.
Unless they do actually know a lot more than they're telling us.
I think, as always, it's question everything, and we should shine more light and less heat on it. It doesn't make sense that he hasn't been seen since Wednesday. That can't be right.
But meanwhile, they have actually searched addresses in East London, 3 in Newcastle. They found containers with corrosive warnings on the label. And of course, this was a despicable attack with alkali, which causes significant burning, as we know, and the damage and the trauma. I mean, just in terms of that, the poor lady here, this 31-year-old lady, has life-changing injuries, still in hospital. It looks like the two daughters do not have life-changing
and thank goodness for that. I mean, the initial report said that, and they're right, and you need to look at that.
But, you know, look, it goes back to the bigger issue for me about the asylum system. This man came here illegally from Afghanistan, was turned down for asylum twice, was then committed a sexual offence, and then for some reason was granted asylum. And so he stays in this country, and everyone around the country, including myself, is going, what on earth is going on?
And you're absolutely right, and it's important to call it out. I know a lot of people say, oh, it's always about asylum, people are always raising the issue. There's the other issue which you haven't mentioned about Christianity. And because he converted to Christianity, apparently
he said he converted.
Well, in inverted commas, this is what happens. And he had somebody who stood up for him and said, you have converted. But he's still surrounded by Muslims, so on and so forth. You need to turn around and say, look, what are the realities? What is the criteria? In the same way as they unpack sentencing so the public understand what's happening. At the moment, there is no trust in the asylum system. And the reason for part of that there is no trust is because people don't really understand what's going to happen. You get the headlines saying, well, he's a sex offender, he's changed religion, and so on and so forth. It's like a ticking the relevant boxes. People understand what boxes to tick, and therefore they abuse the system. What we need is clarity, more light, less heat, to understand this stuff, and clamp down. If there are abuses of the system, we need to clamp down.
Well said, Andrew. Thank you very much indeed. Let's pause there for the moment. We'll take a break now. After the break, we'll go through all of this morning's front pages. Also, I'm delighted to say that joining us this morning, I'm a big fan. Ingrid Tarrant will be joining. Hurrah! TV personality and broadcaster joins us after this break. This is Talk TV. Welcome back to Talk Today with me, David Ball. Time 7:23 on Saturday, February the 3rd. Dr. Rennie, unfortunately very unwell, so Dr. Rennie sending you lots of love. Joining me instead, Andrew Eborn, barrister extraordinaire. And now it's time for the papers, and I'm delighted to say, joining me this morning, Ingrid Tarrant.
Yay.
What a joy, what a pleasure.
Oh, thank you.
We love Ingrid.
Oh, that's such a lovely welcome.
No, but I've known you for so long, actually.
Donkey's years.
Donkey's years.
Yes.
We were
Shocking.
young.
We were. You still look very young.
It's all held together with sellotape. No, but
I want some of that sellotape.
so nice to have you with us. Just before you go through your pick of the papers, let's just look through this morning's front pages. If you are just waking up, makes very sombering reading indeed this morning. Let's start with the Daily Telegraph. And this is, the headline is Teenagers' Lust for Fame Led to Murder of Brianna. This is Brianna Ghey, a sadistic teenage girl who murdered her transgender schoolmate after becoming obsessed with the notorious serial killers has been named. This is Scarlett Jenkinson. She was named as. She was given 22 years for the brutal stabbing of Brianna. Also named was her accomplice, Eddie Ratcliffe, 16 years old, who must also serve a life sentence of at least 20 years behind bars. As I said earlier, I watched that sentencing, and Mrs. Justice Yip, I thought, was visibly moved, and I thought she was very close to tears as she detailed what can only be described as an horrific crime. The Guardian front page this morning, same story, exceptionally brutal. Teens jailed for murder. It goes on to say, it quotes Mrs. Justice Yip saying, "You both took part in a brutal and planned murder, which was sadistic in nature and where a secondary motive was hostility towards Brianna because of her transgender identity." The Mirror this morning, front page again, their headline this morning is "Warped Teens with Thirst for Killing. Planned a brutal and sadistic murder. Now second hit list is revealed." So they actually didn't just target her, because they had a list of other people, allegedly, that they wanted to kill as well.
Also, David, a month before, I think, oh gosh, what's she called now? Scarlett.
Yes.
Was plying this younger girl with gummies and cannabis and
cannabis,
weed.
yeah.
Yes.
She poisoned. You're right. And
Yes.
as a result, and they had this sort of hit list, a kill
Yes,
list,
it's just
which is
so
horrendous.
warped.
Well, there was also, they were going after someone else, weren't they?
Yes.
And then circumstances changed, and
Yeah.
obviously they didn't follow that out. And of course we'll talk about that, but the role of the dark web as well. Let's just whiz through the rest of these. Daily Mail, he stabbed Brianna because he hated trans people. She just wanted to kill for fun. That's the Daily Mail front page this morning. And the Daily Express, again, the pictures, same picture, actually different pictures here. Unmasked evil monsters who killed Brianna. And obviously, as I said earlier, Scarlett Jenkinson's mother was in tears during that sentencing. I don't know how there was a dry eye in the house. Also, Abdul Ezedi, that makes the front page of the Times. Outcry over asylum for suspect in Alkali attack. Exactly what I was saying to Andrew. What on earth is going on in this country when we allow people to come to this country who then commit terrible acts? Also, my understanding is that he should never have been given asylum, because it is very clear you do not grant asylum to someone who has a criminal record. Also, this other story this morning, US hits back in Syria and Iraq after troop deaths. This is Biden actually saying, if you touch an American, we will come after you. The Eye has a completely different front page this morning. Cut income tax to ease the cost of living crisis. Voters urge Hunt. Of course, the general election fast approaching. We have been told that there were going to be two budgets possibly before the next general election. Now, Jeremy Hunt is saying, well, I don't have much fiscal room, so obviously buttering us up for whatever is about to happen. The Sun front page, exclusive union shock. A married rail union boss has been caught having an affair with a train driver, 19 years his junior. This is Dickie Fisher, 62. And of course, he is in ASLEF, which is striking and making everyone's lives a complete misery. And then I've often wondered this: what is the price of love? The Daily Star, the price of love apparently is £9.67 a day.
I think
bargain. It's
I think it's a lot higher too.
£9.67 a minute.
So apparently it's £9.67, 39726 a day, according to not very romantic boffins.
Yes.
Who essentially.
How do they get to that figure? I haven't read the story.
So what they did,
the headline.
well, basically, they worked out that roughly when you buy gifts and dinner and holidays and all the rest of it comes to about 3,500 a year, and they've divided that, and then it's £9 a day.
That's ridiculous.
2 spontaneous gifts, 1 romantic holiday, and 5 beauty treatments, and then etc. is what they say. So
say that again.
What?
They said 2. It doesn't sound very much. This is it. Here's the thing.
Holiday does and beauty treatment.
But there we go. It depends where you go. Bognor Regis is good this time of year.
Okay.
So it says love is 2 spontaneous gifts, 1 romantic holiday in Bognor Regis, and 5 beauty treatments, etc. So they've done a calculation.
Did they work out the holiday was £1,000, I think?
Yeah, and they say 3,500 a year. It does. Well, it doesn't sound that much. Actually, the cost of love is free.
Yeah.
So this is what you should do.
I just think about the underwear, the investment in the underwear. That's really expensive.
Underwear? You're supposed to wear that?
Let's move on, shall we? So, Ingrid, you've chosen some really interesting stories, actually. Let's start with the Times. I've spoken a great deal about the lack of dentists in this country, and this is the story, isn't it?
It is absolutely the story. Do you know, I will go back to when I was, many years ago, when I was younger. To begin with, my father paid for private dentistry. He was called Mr. Hankey.
Mr. Hankey?
Yes, George Hankey in Harley Street. And he said when we had earned our own money, we could pay for our own dentist.
Yes.
Which is totally fair. Well, I couldn't afford to. Well, and I didn't want to afford to. I wanted to go, to nightclubs and buy clothes instead.
Of course.
Yes.
Anyway, long and short, I went to an NHS dentist, and in those days, I had very good teeth. I didn't have fillings, an occasional thing. And I remember this vividly. I ended up with 11, he said, cavities in my mouth. And I thought, well, Mr. Hankey hasn't done his job.
Mr. Hankey.
And I really did think that. But it wasn't. The dentist got paid per filling.
That's right.
So they were encouraged to find holes that didn't exist.
Well, that's right. So the NHS dental charges, I mean, these are way out of date, but essentially we know there is a major problem. 90% of dentists not taking on any adult patients.
And that's shocking. I think it's a duty of care.
So do I. But 80% aren't taking on kids.
Yes, exactly. Which is worse. And actually, it's such a false sense of economy, isn't it? Because they will end up with rotten teeth, they'll have bad gums, end up with false teeth, all sorts of things, abscesses, stomach problems as a result of it. I'm talking like a doctor now, aren't I?
Well, you're doing a great job.
But it is appalling. But you've also got to turn around and say, if somebody's giving you operations, well, there's 2 things. One, it's fraud. It's also, I'd say it's criminal in addition because you're having a treatment which you don't need.
Well, so to be fair, so what does the story say? And I'll tell you what the dentist says.
There's an incentive here that it's worth about £200 million as a. It's an approval stage, actually. And it's a pilot scheme to get these dentists that would ordinarily, because they don't want to do NHS because they get paid, obviously, sort of like doing for the private. So they're going to take on some NHS patients and that haven't been to the dentist for 2 years. Well, I would think I would think it's more likely 10 or 20 years of these people haven't gone in any case. And then just kind of roll it out that way. So let's hope, but as I say, it's a pilot scheme. We don't know if it's going to work or not. And do you know, isn't it awful they have to have an incentive like that? And actually, I just think that morally they should give of their time
but
to
remember,
the NHS.
of course, well, the thing is they are self-employed, so they have to make things work for them financially. But also, when you look at this, and you mentioned about systemic illness, it is the number one reason that young children between 6 and 10 are admitted to hospital.
Yes.
Is it really?
Dental
so
issues.
There we go. So it is a false sense of economy, isn't it? Not to. But then the thing is, this is illustrating that actually the dentists don't want to do work for the NHS in any case. And so the only way that you can do that, and I'm not sure that this money is going to be enough of an incentive.
Well, it won't be. And also, it's about banding. So essentially, they get paid certain rates for whatever they do. Band 1, Band 2 and Band 3. So in Band 1, which is basically where you do an examination, diagnosis, advice, x-rays, they get 25 quid. I mean, it's just not enough.
No.
And so, therefore, if you're paying for your practice and your infrastructure and everything, and your dental staff, how do you make that work?
But you should, in the same way as with doctors, you should do a certain amount of time for the NHS.
I agree.
And I think when your training. So it's not just the incentive, the financial one. It has to be, and when you get all this training, you have to turn around and do a bit of service. Can I just, a bit of credit, first of all, to people in the gallery. Pain in the gum is a great tagline, by the way.
Yes.
Credit where credit's due. Well done in the gallery. I love it.
That'll be Phil then. A master of words.
The tooth, the whole tooth, and nothing but the tooth.
Well done,
That'll be good.
I mean, I think also dentistry has been overlooked for such a long time.
Yes.
So I've never understood why dentistry and medicine are so separate, because obviously they're intrinsically linked.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I do understand it, because people don't want to spend the money, especially as they're going to have to pay for it normally.
But what I meant was that we don't attach the same value to dentistry that we do to the NHS.
Yes.
So actually, we need to have dentistry free at the point of need, in the same way you see a GP.
Well, and people are, very recently, you should teach children how to brush your teeth and do the supervised,
but
all that sort of stuff.
a joke that they're teaching them in school?
But is it a joke, though? Because if the health is so important and we're not getting it right, the trouble is we've sort of alienated people because they said, oh, it's so woke teaching people what to do. The fact that they don't know what to do, and we've had these horrible statistics.
Why don't they know?
Well, then the parents should teach them.
But they don't know. But they don't know themselves.
So without it being a nanny state, and without sort of couching it in those terms, there should be a system that we look at. Prevention is better than cure.
Yes.
So you look at that sort of basis. What can we do better to make sure we don't have these problems? And it's not just about waiting lists, it's about prevention at the early stages.
Do you know something? This is going to be a terribly snobby thing to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. If you look at the people that have false teeth, they are usually the ones that are uneducated and not too bright. And that is, honestly, you look...
I'm thinking about that.
You do like a little survey, I promise you, or if they don't have false teeth, it's because they haven't replaced them and they've got teeth missing.
So I think that there are a number... It's very complicated, that. And I think just looking back, that dental health, and I'm just thinking back to my father's generation, they didn't, in many ways, maybe they didn't look after their teeth in the same way, but certainly lots of older people don't have teeth because they get, you know, as you get older, of course, they start falling out and all the rest of it.
But you look at that, but honestly, I promise you, go around this weekend and whatever, just take a notice teeth.
But if you can't get access to a dentist, then how do you actually make sure that you get good dental health care? And we've heard all these stories of people pulling out their own teeth.
And that's horrendous.
What I'm saying is that I think that the people like that aren't very bright and don't have that money to pay for private, which an awful lot of people don't or don't want to, they still don't know basic dental hygiene.
Well, I think there'll be a lot of people.
I think that applies for anything.
You're right about making sure that people get educated, but there'll be a lot of people spitting out their cornflakes this morning and saying, hang about, it's not about ignorance on that sort of basis. They can't get access. And I think, to be fair to some people, you need to work out. And it's hereditary and various other things as well.
It starts at home. Children shouldn't have to go to school and be taught by the teacher how to clean a teeth.
Well, we would absolutely agree with that. Prevention is better than cure. Let's work out ways that you can look after yourself. But I don't think it's...
but don't you think this goes back to a much bigger issue, which is, and I watch people shopping in the supermarkets, and the diets that people are feeding their children are
fizzy drinks and just like highly additive food, processed food.
So if you give them high fructose corn syrup, which we know is absolutely terrible for you, and it's cheap, then your teeth are not going to do very well, are they, if you don't brush them?
But again, I'm sorry, it comes down to not being well educated or not being taught or understanding about
I don't know that it's well educated.
Cooking.
It's about good parental responsibility, isn't it?
And there's two things as well, because sometimes these cheap foods, which are not good for you, it is a financial thing.
I was about to say the same.
People cannot afford the very expensive stuff. They can't afford dentists. Certainly not on the private ones. They're crazily expensive. Much worse than the States.
I think
honestly,
the whole school system needs to change. They need to bring back cooking.
Agreed.
So that people can, and that, because it's a cheaper way of eating. That's what I mean. It's kind of like, it's a little bit dumb to go out and buy all these McDonald's that are very sort of like...
Other brands are available.
But you're right in that we haven't taught it. Yeah. So if you don't know how to prepare a meal and you go out and you think, you know, I'm going to pay 12 quid for a pizza, which is terrible nutritional value, you'd be better to buy fruit and vegetables and actually...
And you would get, that meal was stretched probably for 2 days, 3 days.
But it's all about education. One of the charities I'm involved with...
So where should that education come from?
Everywhere.
Because I don't think it's the school's responsibility.
No. Well, I think as a society we're responsible.
Partly, though, because that's the way you spend most of your time.
Start with the home, well, the parents or one parent or whatever you have at home, but then also it should be part of the school. I think that this whole idea, just that you're responsible, therefore you carry on with it, is wrong. We have to turn around as a society and say, look, information is power. And one of the charities I'm involved with, UK Harvest, that's exactly what we do. We do food redistribution, we educate people about nutrition, and actually good food doesn't have to be very expensive.
No,
you can create great stuff.
It doesn't.
I mean, interesting, you've polarised people, as you would imagine.
Oh, look at you, the ignorance. The ignorance doesn't have any teeth.
So hang on a minute. Let me just read these. Dan in Kent, good morning to you. Dan says nothing like good old categorising, eh, Ingrid?
Yes, well, I did say.
You did say. But Anna, good morning to you, one of our regulars. Anna says Ingrid is right. And if you look at if you look at Jeremy Carr's old shows, no one on that ever had decent teeth. So that's interesting, and obviously keep all of those views coming in as well. Let's move on and talk about your next story. This is Meghan, my favourite person.
Glorious. Come on, Meghan. The Times in the Mail, yes.
Yes. Oh, this is absolutely brilliant. So the Queen, the late Queen, Queen Elizabeth, she thought that the Meghan's dress was too white for a divorcee. And you know, this is what I love about old-fashioned values and things and traditions, because that was it. It was because it's virginal, isn't it, the white? And she should have gone for perhaps a little cream, I would have thought. Anyway, I just think it's absolutely wonderful. And Ingrid Seward in the Mail, she's a great friend of mine, actually. Ingy.
Oh, is she?
Yes, we go out as the two Ingrids, and we call it, and then anybody that's in the middle of us is the Ingrid sandwich. So they're really
is that right?
privileged. Yes, they're very privileged.
How are their teeth? They're okay.
They're marvellous.
Is the other Ingrid also a Viking?
Yes, she is partly.
Yeah, because you are.
Yes, I'm Viking. Oh,
are you Viking?
Yes.
Look at you.
Yeah, Norwegian.
No,
do you speak Norwegian?
Oh, yes, yeah.
Yeah. Don't do yeah again.
Come on, give us a bit of Norwegian.
Yeah, good morning.
Guten Morgen.
Yeah, it is a little bit like...
Gluten-free.
Yeah, it does sound, doesn't it? What shall I say? Hello, hello.
You sound like that thing off the Muppets. Swedish chefs.
I'm not convinced, Ingrid.
But I think this is a sad story, and I'll tell you why. The Queen, she told, what it says in here, it says the Queen told her confidant, Lady Elizabeth Anson, her cousin. She didn't want anybody else to know, and it was a private conversation. Now it's in a book. Now that's not very good, is it? And the whole headline about too white for divorcee is sort of playing on the racist thing as well, and so on and so forth.
Oh, I never saw it that way.
Absolutely. Somebody will see that headline and say, that's what's going to happen. Her Majesty, the late Queen, was very discreet. She never spoke about anything. It's now in a book. I think that's wrong.
You think it's racism, Tony?
No, people will read that. People will read that. If you turn around and say, wedding dress too white... That's what people are going to say.
I see. No, I read it far more as Ingrid
it was, just straight with no agenda.
But also, you know, it is extraordinary. I thought Meghan and Harry would disappear off into the sunset, and here we are still talking about
and good for them, because actually I'm probably the only person in the country who ever speaks up for them, because they do good as well. No,
Afia does as well.
I know, but they do good as well. And I talk about the Invictus Games.
I don't speak up for
they talk about mental health. They talk about teeth. They all those sort of things you're working on. That's amazing. No, there is some good, and I think we should sometimes give credit. Not everybody's really bad. Not everybody's really good. There's a mixture of both. Yeah. But I think this is a sad story about the revelations, and I think Her Majesty said it was said in confidence to somebody. It's now in this book. That's got to be wrong.
Yeah, I would agree. Now, your next story, I've seen this video. Before we get... I saw it yesterday.
So did I. It's just
I didn't know what to do with myself. But first of all, before that, let's take a break. This is Talk TV.
Make sure that when we say we're going to ban them, we actually do ban them.
There are so many politicians now who just say my dad was a Boston. Like, you're David Cameron. No, he wasn't.
It's like brought to you by Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London. Very rarely meet anybody that says, you know, the thing about London is it's got a great mayor, Sadiq Khan, brilliant guy.
In the cities, there are areas where there are no vegetables. It's particularly difficult for those people to do what Mark is saying. If he comes up with this argument again, I'll sit on it.
Stop creating creating all of these funny little factions with their funny little names, the New Conservatives, the ERG, the Common Sense Research Group, the Red Wall, Red Trouser, Popcorn. I mean, popcorn, what is that?
If you're talking about multiculturalism, it's working class white boys who get put in the army. The poorest people in society are the ones who are going to be put on the front line.
Something is going horribly wrong.
We can do a lot better.
Donald Trump didn't just win, he obliterated. This is a guy facing nearly 100 criminal charges, and yet all that's done is actually make him more popular.
Trump is canny enough to know that all publicity is good publicity.
I don't want a president who's been impeached. If he's able to bamboozle you, that's the way it goes.
I did my 6 months, I came back, nobody would touch me. I put my head down, I persisted, I carried on.
When I say I am God, I'm not joking.
Did you feel Elvis was controlling?
I've been answering your question, you answer mine.
It's actually not my job to answer your questions. I've asked you 2 questions. Should Hamas stay in power and are they a terror group? You're refusing to answer either of them. That is very telling.
Talk TV, it's the only place where you get the truth.
You've done a book on poetry. Poetry and music for the many. I love poetry. We can agree on that.
Welcome back to Talk Today with me, David Bull. Time 7:45, Saturday, February the 3rd. I hope you're very well wherever you are waking up. Ingrid Tarrant running us through the papers, joined also by Andrew Eborn this morning. Let's move to Fawlty Towers. Now, I grew up watching Fawlty Towers.
Yes, ditto.
It's priceless.
Yes, absolutely. Celebrate the 50th anniversary, they're bringing it to the stage. John Cleese has organised this. It was a genius stroke, actually. But it's going to be a conglomeration that kind of he's put together of the hotel inspector. Remember that with the rat? That was absolutely brilliant. It was brilliant. The German, which actually I'm surprised that he's...
They're allowed to do that, extraordinary, because he does the whole march and all.
I know he does, but I have to say I do think it's terribly funny. And the communication problems, which I don't really remember.
Well, it's permanent, the communication problems. Manuel.
Well, Manuel was Spanish, wasn't he?
Yes,
and
exactly.
didn't understand anything, and he kept being clipped round the head by John Cleese. I think we've got a clip of Fawlty Towers to bring you now. Let's have a look.
Please, senor, Mr. Fawlty wants to say adios. He wants to... No, no! Oh! Sorry. Good afternoon, gentlemen. What can I do for you 3 gentlemen?
Oh, it's just brilliant.
Set in a boarding house in Torquay. Yes. I seem to recall. I've stayed in places like that.
It is. You stay in places where you think it's a documentary. You do. It works on that.
Just brilliant. Okay, let's move on quickly to this great story in the Express, page 23, about a D-Day veteran.
Oh, this is absolutely wonderful. He's 100 years old. You wouldn't believe it looking at him. And to celebrate it, he was given a plaque with thanks from the local lieutenant and the people of Somerset. And he's so modest. He said, well, you know, I just was there, did what I had to do.
And this is Lieutenant Richard Wallace, was second in command of a Navy landing craft taking US troops and tanks to Utah Beach in Normandy as part of Operation Overlord in 1944. He looks pretty well, doesn't he?
He looks absolutely fantastic. On the same page, I'll just flip across, there's Bill, who's 96, who looks absolutely fantastic. In fact, they could be brothers. And he's still working, and he won't give up the job. And he said, until the man comes, in fact, it's lovely quote, until the bloke in the tall hat and screwdriver comes to screw the lid shut, I'll keep going. And it's such a wonderful ethos, isn't it? Just work, work, work. And he said, you have to keep your mind moving. The trick is to not stop, keep working.
And he works in a sawmill, this guy.
Yes, he set up his own business. He was illiterate when he left school, became a plumber's apprentice, and then he just moved on. And now the next generation taking over, but he's still there.
We often say that actually when people give up,
They
That's when
die.
mortality. So I think all credit to growing old disgracefully. People like that are inspirational. We can work on that premise.
Absolutely, they are, and really an example for young people, because I think a lot of depression is due to the fact that they don't ever feel they've achieved anything because they just can't be bothered.
You need a purpose in life.
I think a lot of it is also loneliness, because if you haven't got anyone to talk to, and I was talking to some people about this, with the rise of automation, you don't talk to anyone at the checkout, you don't see anyone, and actually I think, and I know you love your AI, but actually there's nothing like having that personal communication.
Well, you say that, and I can tell you one of the biggest developments in artificial intelligence is about companionship. And what happens now, in the same way as they did a survey last year about the University of California, where they were saying chatting to ChatGPT was more empathetic and more effective than chatting to your GP, because you can't get the appointment and everything else, because you've got the time. So I predict, Andrew Eborn, back to the futurist, I predict that what's going to happen is the development and the progress of artificial companions is going to be massive.
Oh, do you know, I can't bear the thought. I mean, I can't.
And they will all have beautiful teeth.
Yes.
Have you seen those robots, though? And we did it on the show a couple of weeks ago, and it's got a little face, and you start chatting to it. I don't think it's quite the replacement.
It isn't. And do you know, it puts you in a false world, and it cushions you from adversity and challenges. I think, honestly, I find it really, really scary, and it's just a slippery slope. People aren't equipped anymore to face adversity and criticism, and it'll just be your best friend.
It will. Rise of AI, girlfriends and things like that. Absolutely. It's a massive industry, but it will get better. And what happens is the media needs to look at the positive side.
And then the mental effects will get worse.
No, it will get your brain going superbly. You watch, people will talk and engage in a way that you can... No, I predict we'll have that conversation.
We'll have this conversation in 5 years' time.
I am going to hold over the story that made me chuckle. Well, actually, it was more than chuckle yesterday. I was actually... I was doing Talk Today yesterday, and I was...
Talk Today yesterday.
Yeah, I was doing Talk Today yesterday, and I was sitting next to Sarah, and they showed me this video, which I'll show you in just a minute, but it is too priceless for words. Also, some news. From Monday, we're actually launching a brand new podcast for you to follow. Now, if you're a fan of the Sunday Night Club, then you will not want to miss Back of the Stand with Mark Saggers. Now, what is that? Well, it will feature some of the biggest names in sport and delve deep into the controversial and tough discussions that others aren't brave enough to have. A new episode will be released every week, so make sure you don't miss Back of the Stand with Mark Saggers. That's from Monday, and you can get that from wherever you get your podcasts. That is a great segue, actually. Let's do things slightly differently, because it's now time for Tom Clayton's Sporting Weekend.
Tom Clayton's Sporting Weekend.
Hello.
Hello.
Lovely to see you. Lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you.
Sport, very busy.
It is very busy.
Yes.
There's lots of things to talk about. I kind of normally on a weekend morning, as you kind of walk past and we have a chat.
We do.
I normally say, there's a few bits around today that we can talk about this, we can talk about that. This morning I was kind of like, right, I know exactly what we're talking about. It's all sorted. It's all virtually done. It's all set in place, and we'll start with the cricket.
Now, is the cricket in Hyderabad?
The cricket is not in Hyderabad. I've been practicing this. I think it's in Vishakhapatnam, which I think is the right pronunciation. Yeah. But yes, England doing okay. I'm just looking down at the scorecard in front of me. They bowled India out for 396 in the first innings. England, it's a very batter-friendly surface, so England hoping for a big score. They're 118 for 2.
Right. 118 for 2. Okay.
Yeah. So Zach Crawley out for 76 on his birthday. So he got a half century on his birthday, which is very good. He was probably hoping for a century, but he's done very well. Ben Duckett out for 21 as well. Ollie Pope's in there at the moment. Joe Root as well. So some good scoring.
And
power
how is England performing then? Generally, do you think?
Generally quite well. Quite well. It's a slightly changed team from the first test. The first test was just this time last week. I sat and spoke to you as if like England aren't going to win the first test match. It was going to be such a tall order, and they came back and absolutely walloped it so well. Ollie Pope was magnificent in the second innings last week. And they came back and they lead going into this second test. India looking okay in that first innings. England looking okay in their innings. It's kind of on a knife edge. We don't really know where it's going.
Your report was the inspiration for them to do better, you see.
Absolutely.
I think that was
my cynicism has prompted a nation to do better.
Well, you did. You came in and rolled your eyes. Are you a fan of cricket?
I am, in a way. But I wouldn't mind if I missed it. But
I am in a way.
A true fan. I wouldn't.
So we were talking about this earlier. The thing I can't quite get my head around is it just goes on forever.
It does. Now, I've been looking into this very briefly, and there's no sort of clear answer as to why it lasts 5 days. Mostly because when it first started happening, when they first started playing long-form cricket in the 18th century, it took place over 4 days. And then later on in the timeline, they started introducing a rest day in the middle of 5th day. And then at some point, they sort of said, well, why don't we just play on that 5th day?
Right.
So a test match can now last up to 5 days. Not that they all do last for 5 days. Some of them last for 4, some of them last for 3. Some of the biggest sort of blowouts, you will call them, last for just 2 days. And some of them go the full 5 days and end in a draw.
Excellent. Well done. I'm very impressed with your research there. Let's also talk about the Six Nations.
Yes.
Now, my most burning question is, why are there 6 nations? And you and I spoke about this morning, because it originally was the home nations, wasn't it?
It was the home nations in France. So they were
Why
the kind
France?
Well, they were the kind of the top nations in world rugby in the Northern Hemisphere up until the sort of mid-1990s when rugby union became professionalised. It was I think it goes back to the 1960s as the sort of... originally it was a home nations tournament, then France joined in the 1960s, I believe, and then Italy joined in the year 2000 or 2001. Hoping to kind of bridge the gap. Italy haven't quite done that, but there's still good value. England go away to them today, and I sort of think that the Six Nations in its current format, I think it works quite well. The fact that there are 5 matches over a course of 7 weeks. Granted, it's not ideal when you have Ireland playing France on the first night, and by now,
So that was very significant.
Yeah, there's one match. We're 1 match in, and we virtually, barring a miracle, we already kind of know who's probably going to win.
Right.
Because Ireland are the best team in the world. They've gone to France, who are their biggest competition, and they've beaten them in Marseille. Marseille's a spectacular stadium, brilliant match as well. Unfortunate red card in the first half, I believe it was, but Ireland played through it very well. France put up a good fight, but Ireland the best team on the day. So so all eyes on Italy against England at 2:15 today, and Scotland going to Wales at 4:45.
And can I just ask you about another story in the week about children playing rugby? What are your views on that? I was forced to play rugby at school, and we were not allowed to play football. The story this week was saying just to sort of summarise that, it said it's child abuse for children to play rugby because they've got developing brains.
I understand the point of view. I disagree. Personally.
Why?
Because I played rugby. I turned out okay.
That's what you think.
I played rugby from the age of 9, 10, and it had no real detriment. I mean, I understand there are some people who they want to avoid it. Some people don't like contact. They want to play football. Some people don't want to play sports. We kind of err into the point of if we're saying that forcing children to play rugby is child abuse, at what point do we say, well, forcing them to play football is child abuse, forcing them to play cricket
but I think
is child abuse?
I
understand the
contact sport,
but I will say that up until a certain age, you're not meant to play contact anyway. It's tag rugby or
and interestingly, Sarah was telling me that with her children, they introduce rugby differently now. So it starts much more with touch rugby, and then you introduce various other aspects of the game. Certainly in my day, we were in scrums. You were straight in there from a very early age.
And did anybody suffer brain damage?
Well, it's a good question.
No.
I don't know.
But you would know. But you would know
well,
at
would
the
you?
time. Yes, because you would have seen a serious injury.
Or
do you then have your peer being carted off in a stretcher going to hospital?
Well, that definitely happened.
Oh, did it? But probably a broken arm.
No,
not necessarily.
No concussion and things like that.
It has caused a lot of damage on that sort of thing. I think this whole idea, just explain what tag rugby is. You have this little ribbon, effectively, and if you pull it, there's no touch on that sort of
effectively, it's on Velcro, so you pull it off and it reattaches.
And it's a lot safer, and you still get the skill element, but you don't get damage.
But then there is an element of, when you get to a certain point, if you want to carry on playing rugby, there is the danger attached to it. I was forced to retire when I was 23 because I kept on breaking. I had about 4 concussions in the space of 2 years.
I was the same team as Johnny Wilkinson.
I watched Johnny Wilkinson.
Yeah, I was the same team.
Okay, so what about helmets then? What about protective headgear?
At that point, you get into American football and you get into that sort of thing where the protection isn't as sort of good as you think it is, but people feel more invincible.
Yeah, that's interesting. Just very quickly, time is tight. Let's talk about Tyson Fury.
Yes, fight has been called off for the time being. He sustained a cut in sparring So this kind of this all-consuming massive fight that we've been calling for years, it was set for the 17th of February. It's now off against Alexander Usyk. And Alexander Usyk's manager has gone out on Instagram and said, why don't you consider retirement?
Oh, wow. Tom, thank you very much indeed. That was today's Tom Clayton Sporting Weekend.
Tom Clayton's Sporting Weekend.
Ingrid, thank you so much for taking us through this morning's papers. I know, we're going to show it in a bit because for lots of reasons I won't bore you with. Ingrid, thank you very much indeed. After the break, we're going to be talking about the leasehold system in this country. I'll be talking to Barry Gardner, Labour MP. This is Talk TV. Well, I'm joined this morning by Andrew Eborn, barrister extraordinaire. I love that story.
Oh, isn't that glorious? I love it. It's got to be wonderful. It's fantastic. How many lessons did you take before you passed?
I actually was very good. My mum was brilliant with me, so she took me driving when I was 16 on a disused airfield, and so I was actually fairly good. And then I applied for the test, and then I did the minimum number of lessons, and I passed first time.
Oh, brilliant. Well
but it was
done.
3,000 years ago.
Oh, no, but also they've changed it now, because you do not just the practical, you have to do a bit of theory, and you need to know what the engine is and all those extraordinary things.
Well, I mean, there are still things I'm sure I don't know.
Right.
I mean, is there an argument that we should retest everyone? Because...
Oh, there has to be an argument, doesn't there? Because you just turn on, people just drive forever, and that's the most risky time after. But also they're crazily expensive. You know, driving lessons
and a
are
big
absolute
waiting list.
fortune.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. And you're right. During lockdown and everything else, obviously the backlog of people trying to get their test was horrendous. So we need to look at that. We need to get the country moving to make that make sense.
We do. By the way, I've got some other fascinating facts for you.
Yes.
On this day in 1954, the late Queen visited Australia. She was the first reigning monarch to do so.
Oh, really? Good heavens.
It's a good one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Also, on this day in 1989, I remember this, BT banned chat lines.
Ah.
Do you remember when you could ring up? Well, you could ring up and have a chat with someone.
You could. I never did.
Well, I didn't either. But the reason they banned them was because this 12-year-old boy phoned up a chat line and managed to rack up a bill for his parents of £6,000.
£6,000. Incredible. Also, we should say it's the day the music died. This is the day that Buddy Holly died.
Yes, it is.
That plane crash.
Yes, that's right.
And things like that. So incredibly sad as well.
Indeed. Now, we were talking about rugby as well. This is from Mike T. Good morning to you. Mike Tyndall. No.
I see.
No.
Okay, yes.
At the age of 14, I broke my tibia and my fibula on a solidly frozen pitch playing rugby at boarding school. I was told by the nurse it was a sprain. I walked in it for 3 days before I was taken to hospital and then ended up having a big operation to fix it. That was in the 1980s. I hear your pain, Mike. Yes, I mean, there is an... I don't know about... rugby... I think is rather a beautiful game to watch because it is defined and I think you can see the lines, and particularly when they're passing it down the line. I'm just not quite sure what age kids should start playing contact sports.
Well, I think that's the issue, isn't it? And you turn on, if you can play these sports safely, and then say, I'm not quite sure when tag rugby was introduced, but you can get people enjoying it at a young age. There's no reason why you should have these dangers. If you go to America, obviously, they're all padded out as they play these big contact sports. That's got to be good. You must be able to play sport without having to suffer the consequences of some sort of personal injury.
Indeed, indeed. Let's move on and talk about something which is close to many people's hearts, which is trying to buy a flat or indeed a house, and particularly your first flat or wherever it is. But we have a very archaic system in this country which is called the leasehold system. And there is an article that ran this week about the bill that's going through Parliament at the moment to reform England's, and I use this word, and I think it's the right word, feudal system. It dates back to sort of medieval times. It's going through Parliament, but it is the craziest situation that people are in. And this poor chap called Chris Hayes bought a flat in central Manchester. It was brand new when he moved in, so it was very exciting. And then, of course, it all started to go wrong. So the water started leaking through the badly built roof. He is then facing a bill, wait for this, of £170,000 to repair it. Now, obviously, he can't afford to do that. He's 34 years old. He said to do that would leave him homeless, bankrupt and jobless, because if he went bankrupt, he then couldn't work in financial services, which is what he does. Now, the extraordinary thing about this is Chris is liable, not the developer, under the terms of his lease. And this seems to me to be a bonkers system that is well overdue to be reformed. And someone else who shares that view is Barry Gardner, who is Labour Member of Parliament for Brent North. Good morning to you.
Morning. Yes, David. It's a very sad situation for people who find themselves in leasehold flats.
Absolutely right. So you've been campaigning on this for a long time. Can you, I sort of was outlining one case study there. Can you explain what the complexities of this are and what this bill is trying to address?
Yeah. Look, when you buy a new home in a flat, you think you're buying a home just as if it's a house on a street. You're not. What you're buying is you're buying the right to live there for a period of time, say 99 years, and that's the extent of your lease. And you think you might have control so that if you want to decide to paint the windows a different color, or if you want to change the windows because they're not working properly, or any work that you want to do to it, you think that it's your right to do it. No, it's not. It's somebody else's. It's the freeholder. It's the person who you bought the lease from who gets to say what work needs doing, when it needs doing, and how much you will pay for it. And that's the problem. Somebody else has control over your home, and it's not you, but you end up paying for it. And so lots of people, literally 5 million people, are in leasehold flats, and most of them are finding that it's actually a huge problem. If there are problems with the building, they can't sell, they can't move on. Fire-stopping problems after Grenfell, all the fire safety defects that were found in blocks of flats after the Grenfell fire tragedy means that people actually can't sell, they can't move, because no mortgage lender will give a new buyer a mortgage on the property. And that's the problem. People are trapped in their own homes.
And this seems fundamentally unjust, and particularly one of the things I wanted to ask you was if you buy a new flat and there are defects to that, I thought it would be covered by the NHBC guarantee in the first instance. Is that not always the case?
Well, you'd think so, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
What very often happens is that each body blames the other. So the NHBC will say, well, it's the developer. The developer will say, well, it's the building control officer. The building control officer will blame the project manager. And you go round in a neat circle with everybody blaming everybody else and nobody ending up doing the work to sort out your property that you're living in but have no control over. Earlier this week in my own constituency, there was a fire. A major fire, 125 firefighters were there, 3 of those tall turntables and about 20 fire engines. And there was cladding on the outside of the property. Cladding just like at Grenfell, that combustible cladding that caused so much problem. Now, that fire and that cladding was still there because for 3 years, the owner of the property, that is the housing association, has been negotiating with the developer as to who's going to pay the bill for taking the cladding off. So now, fortunately, in this case, none of the residents were injured or killed in the fire. Everybody was evacuated safely, and that was a wonderful testimony to the fire brigade. But the problem was this: that fire should never have happened. That cladding should never have still been on that building. And it's still there because people were arguing about who was responsible for paying the costs.
And in the interim, of course, it's people who are caught in the middle of this whilst people are arguing about who is going to pay for it. I mentioned the NHBC earlier. That's the National House Building Council, and you have certain rights under that. It's interesting. One of the people who is affected by this says, why is it that when it benefits the freeholder, you're a leaseholder, and when it doesn't, you're suddenly a homeowner?
Yeah, well, exactly. Look, so when there are fire problems, fire defects in the building, very often what the the head leaseholder or the freeholder will do is they'll put in something called a waking watch. That is somebody who goes around the building to make sure that there aren't any fires and to alert you if there are. But that waking watch, you often end up paying for. So all these costs are being loaded onto you. The alarm system, the new fire doors, these are costs which very often are being, you as the leaseholder are being made to pay for. And it's completely iniquitous.
And so for me, I struggle with this. So you're spending all this money, and as you rightly say, you're not actually buying that particular flat. You're buying essentially a tenancy for 99 years or whatever it is on that particular piece of land. Now, the government under Mr. Gove says, right, OK, we're getting a bill through Parliament. It will address this. But that's not the case, is it? It actually will only apply to houses. It doesn't actually apply to flats.
Yes, look, it applies to leasehold houses. That's a separate problem with leasehold houses, because what's been happening there is that the developers have now, it's a scam, quite honestly. They create new leasehold houses. And the result of that is that they charge people a ground rent. Now, that ground rent may start off being nominal. It might be £250 a year. There's no service provided for that. It's just an ongoing payment. And in the small print of your lease, what you find is that ground rent doubles every so often, maybe every 5 years. So suddenly it's £500, then it's £1,000, then it's £2,000, then it's £4,000, £8,000, £16,000. It just goes on exponentially. So we have people now in these houses which, to all intents and purposes, you look at and you think, well, it's just a normal house. No, it's not, because you're actually paying to live there. Sometimes, lots of people at the moment were paying £8,000 a year just to live in their house, receiving no service at all. So this bill does address some problems, but it doesn't address the major problems of people trapped in leasehold flats.
So there clearly is a political imperative from people like yourselves to change the leasehold system for flats. Is that likely at all? Because at the moment we've got people trapped. As you said, people can't sell those flats. They're pretty much worthless. They've put their life savings into this, and it's fundamentally unfair.
Well, look, this bill was supposed to do that. And Michael Gove originally said, I'm going to end the feudal leasehold system. Well, he hasn't. And I'm afraid it will have to fall, I hope, to a future Labour government to do just that. And the good news is that that is a commitment that Labour's made, that we will end this leasehold flat system and we'll move to a system called commonhold. Every other country in the world has changed from leasehold. So we introduced it, of course, around the British Empire. So Australia had it, America had it, Canada had it, everywhere that where we left our footprints had leasehold. Every single country has changed except us. They've gone to commonhold, they've gone to strata title. And so what we propose is to do what the rest of the world has done very successfully for a long period of time.
And Barry, can I just ask you, is that a cast iron guarantee that you will move from these leaseholds to a common hold?
Absolutely, and I was delighted that my colleague Matthew Pennycook, who was the Shadow Minister on the Bill Committee with me, gave that commitment in Parliament, that we will move to a common hold system for the 5 million people trapped in leasehold flats.
Barry, very good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. That's Barry Gardiner, Labour Member of Parliament for Brent North, who's campaigning to get rid of the leaseholder system. Andrew, it just seems iniquitous. You know, it's the most expensive thing you'll ever buy. It's incredibly difficult to get on the housing ladder. You have to have multiples of income. When you do finally get on there and say you spend 200, 300,000 or whatever it is, or in this case 800,000 one of these, you expect to get something you own.
Yeah, no, it's absolute nonsense. And as you rightly said, and both of you said in this interview, is that every other country in the world has moved away from leasehold and start looking at common hold, which is basically you have and own your property as freehold indefinitely. I mean, you need that certainty. Let's get it tidied up. Let's get it tidied up quickly.
Well, so, and also then, and Barry's right, you get this ground rent, which is actually for nothing at all.
Tuppence halfpenny.
Yeah, I mean, but also it doesn't go anywhere. Yeah. So, I mean, it can be quite significant for some properties. On top of that, then if you live in a flat, there's then a service charge, and it seems seems to me in a lot of these properties, you have no control over that, and suddenly you're landed with a whopping great bill.
Yeah, and that's the problem. You find a lot of people are taking over the management of the blocks that they might live in and so on and so forth. You need to look at it. It needs to be reformed. It needs to be reformed urgently.
You need a good lawyer, Andrew.
Yes.
That's what you need. Right. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Eborn, for the moment. Time for a break. After the break, it's our head-to-head. Joining us this morning, Luke Hildyard, Director of the High Pay Centre. Joining him is Adam Stott, who is an entrepreneur and business coach. That's all still to come. This is Talk TV. Welcome back to Talk Today with me, David Bull. I forgot my name there. Andrew Eborn joins me this morning. Dr. Renee, very sadly unwell. I hope you get better soon, Renee. That's what she says. I think she's in the Maldives. But anyway, let's move on. Lots of messages coming in. Simon, good morning to you. Good morning, David and Andrew. Strange question, Andrew. Were you at the Olympia Toy Fair last week? If not, you have a doppelganger walking around London.
Well, the answer is both, actually. I do have several doppelgangers, including Will Ferrell and various others. But yes, I was at the Toy Fair. It's lovely to see you there. I do lots of licensing around the world. I broker intellectual property rights. So I made lots of people lots of money.
Very nice.
So that's what I was doing, playing with the toys, seeing the new stuff. Absolutely.
Right, we're talking about leaseholds there with Barry Gardner. Angela in Dorset said, this leasehold thing is the same applies if you lease a business unit. It's a disgrace. I think that's different, though. Leasing a business unit is different to buying a property where you only have a 99-year lease. Anyway, Walter makes a great point as well. We don't have leasehold in Scotland. No, you don't. And that's exactly, as Barry said, we need to move to a common hold system. This one says, I take it that law was written by clowns in government. There should be a pathway that is concurrent. I mean, obviously it's a feudal system. It dates back to medieval times, doesn't it? And it was about the landed gentry, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. There are some leasehold properties north of the border.
Oh,
there are some. And it's also called something different over there. Freehold property is known as fewhold, but it's the same sort of thing.
Yeah.
But the principle is there. It needs to be reformed. I mean, that's the clear for the reasons that Barry mentioned.
Absolutely right. I've also been asking this morning, given the shocking story about Brianna Ghey, do you think the sentencing is right? Should we, and I sort of hate to ask this, but I kind of think it's appropriate. Is the sentence right? 22 years, 20 years? Should we bring back the death penalty? And Susan says, if 100% sure, well, that's the problem, isn't it? Someone committed murder or life-changing crime, then yes, we should bring back the death penalty. If any doubt, then a life sentence, and it should mean life, no parole, nothing off for good behaviour. That's an insult to victims. Also, this one from Martin says, bring back the death penalty, definitely. The US is always used as an example as to why it's ineffective. However, Japan also has the death penalty, and it's one of the safest countries in the world. And the gun laws in Japan are much more similar to the United Kingdom rather than the US, which makes it more relevant. There's another very important point here about Ezedi. Obviously, we're still looking, or the police are still looking for him. With all the attention he's getting, could it lead to more copycat incidents? I mean, certainly the details of the alkaline being used is graphic.
Yeah, in the same way as I was talking about the horrible murder that happened, is you don't want to tell people how to find. This is not a recipe on that sort of basis. There's so many questions to be asked, not least why has it taken so many days to track him down? I do not believe that last time he was caught on CCTV was Wednesday. That doesn't make any sense at all. And we've talked about, if you link all things up, and going back to my baby about artificial intelligence and facial recognition.
Well, they are using that.
Exactly. You can identify people instantly. So this will come out, and that'll be the first question. Why has it taken so long, and why have we not heard anything since Wednesday?
Indeed. Andrew, thank you very much indeed for the moment. Right, it's time for Head to Head. Head to Head. Well, joining us this morning, I'm delighted to say, Luke Hildyard, Director of the High Pay Centre, and Adam Stott, who is an entrepreneur and business coach. Good morning.
Good morning.
Lovely to see both of you. The stories this morning, they're really, I mean, it's really tough in so many ways. We've talked about these terrible crimes that have taken place, also what's going on the global stage. Now, when I woke up this morning, The story that's leading the news in many news outlets is the United States has dropped more than 125 bombs on Iran's military and allies in Iraq and in Syria as a retaliation for attacks on American troops. Now, the US bombers flew across the Atlantic, some of them. They hit more than 85 targets in Iraq and Syria, including sites held by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Now, this is obviously retaliation on the back of 160 attacks on American forces. We saw those young, really young 3 soldiers being killed as well. And Biden actually said, and I said this at the beginning of the programme, a very pertinent comment. If you harm an American, we will respond. I'm nervous this is escalating, and very, very quickly.
Absolutely. I think that is the danger, and the thing that everybody's worried about is that, you know, all of this escalation, there seems to be masses of it going on at the moment in multiple different areas of the world, and essentially this stuff compounding against each other causes bigger problems. But it is a difficult one because, you know, the United States are there, they're getting attacked consistently, and they do have to protect themselves and protect their bases. So it's a very, very difficult one. I think the Biden comment, the way he positioned the comment was, look, we don't want to be escalating, we don't want to be positioning war, but we do have to protect our soldiers. That was the comment, right?
And that's probably a very strong point, actually. It's about a show of defiance, because I'm not sure Iran actually wants to get involved in this. Now, we know that all of those groups are sponsored by Iran, whether it's the Houthis or whether it's Hamas or Hezbollah or whoever it is. But just in terms of this, the United Kingdom, we're now sending another aircraft carrier to the Red Sea to replace the USS Dwight Eisenhower. It's thought either going to be the HMS Prince of Wales or the HMS Queen Elizabeth. At the end of the day, they're protecting the Red Sea, and obviously this is a hugely important shipping lane. Where do you stand on where we are, how we de-escalate this? Because that has to be the outcome that everyone needs.
Yes, I think Adam kind of summed it up nicely in that what America is doing is reactive to the attacks on the US troops, and obviously they do have to and want to respond to that. It is sort of striking how kind of sort of desensitized we've become to this sort of news. I mean, like, America's been bombing the Middle East pretty much my entire life. So when you sort of see headlines that it's, you know, that it's been happening last night, you're kind of like, oh, so what's going on now? I think the sort of question is, what's the sort of long-term strategy? What's the end game? Is it just to sort of contain Iran and, you know, step in if they really step out of line? As you say, these are the attacks are on like Iran-linked militias, as opposed to Iran. They've said they're not going to attack Iran itself.
Iran stepping out of line. What does that look like to you?
Well, it's these Iranian-backed militias attacking the US, attacking the shipping lanes, as you were just saying. There's also the question of how much control over them Iran actually has, because, as you say, they're Iranian backed. They get their sort of money and weaponry from Iran, but there's been a lot of discussion recently about how much control Iran actually has over them, and whether they, you know, whether they're sort of a little bit
Iran says
going
it was
off doing
not
their own thing. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right.
They're sort of, you know, they're denying the responsibility. And as I say, a lot of people are saying now that, you know, do the Houthis, the groups in Iraq, in Syria, Hezbollah in Lebanon, does Iran actually have that much, you know, complete authority over them?
And you mentioned that actually it was I think it was a considered response. I think Biden and the security team actually took time to decide what to do here. It's not the end of these strikes as well. Yeah. Just in terms of this, I mean, we've obviously got this ongoing conflict, haven't we, with Israel, and that is at the base of this. And I just don't know what that resolution is. So the two-state solution has been widely mooted as the way to go. Netanyahu's been very, very clear that is not happening on his watch. Also, he wants Israel to be in charge of security in a Palestinian state. I don't understand how that could possibly work.
Well, it's all very, very difficult, the politics of it all. I think the danger is, you know, two different things there. The strikes, if they continue these strikes and they continue attacking, all of this just compounds and gets worse. And yeah, all right, Iran are saying they're not responsible for this in the moment, but then what happens when they go and hit the next thing and the next thing? You're just continually creating conflict and it's just making it worse. It's difficult. I think you've got to do everything you can to go in, solve these problems in the most diplomatic way possible, because there's no point in people just keep getting killed all the time and having this mass escalation.
I agree. I just don't know how diplomacy works. Now, also on the back of that, General Sir Patrick Sanders, head of the army, has warned we are not spending enough money on defence. So at the moment we have 75,000 troops in the army. By 2034, in 10 years' time, we'll only have 52,000. We've only got 29,000 in the Navy. There's a really interesting article where he says Britons need to be very clear about the threats that this country faces, and we need to be ready for war. Do you think we could be ready for war?
Well, I think what's kind of interesting, this, I'm going to slightly sort of take it off a tangent, if it's okay, but I think it's important and related, is that in my work, we do a lot of work on taxation, the super rich, and when you talk about that, people sort of jump up and down, and they don't like taxes. They don't want to sort of punish people who are perceived as being successful or entrepreneurial or whatever. But how do we fund the armed forces, the police, the border force, all these things that are in crisis at the moment? The NHS education service with schools crumbling as well. You've got sort of towering wealth being concentrated in this sort of tiny elite over here, and then you've got stagnating living standards, crumbling public services over here.
But you say that, but actually,
are we not going to use? Are we not going to put the two and two together?
It's what I would say on that. You're talking about terrible living standards. If we can't protect ourselves, those living standards are going to get a lot
of course,
worse.
But it's kind of the same.
Worse, right?
But it's kind of the same thing, isn't it? Like we've got, I think
there's nothing more important than actually defending. With all of this conflict going on in the world, they need to be focused on how do you improve our security.
And that's the nub, isn't it, Andrew? Yeah. That's the nub, because without defence, without security, you've got nothing.
No. I completely agree, but you've got to fund it.
But but we have the highest tax burden.
But then your
we've had
first instinct is go to the super rich.
We've got a low tax burden compared to a lot of the Western world.
Nothing works in a vacuum, and you're right. It doesn't mean you're excluding one, but it's not just about our defence. The trouble is we're financing policing the world, aren't we? We're supplying weapons to other countries and so on and so forth. And what you need to do, all of those things are right. We need to make sure there's relevant standards of health, of education and so on, and relevant facilities, but it's within that. We also must ensure that we are safe. But you need to look at the whole picture, not just an isolated incident.
And also, just going back to your point, there are those people who are really struggling, but because of fiscal drag, they're being dragged into higher tax brackets. So there is a real sense, and we're going to see this as the election approaches. So we've got, you're right, we've got this push-pull saying we need to increase our defence spending, so from 2.3% where it should be. And we were talking about this last week. Yes. Should it be 5%, for example? At the same time, of course, people feel incredibly stretched. We've got a general election coming up. Now, we've got both parties, both major parties, saying they're going to give tax cuts.
Exactly, and you've just had the International Monetary Fund taking a sort of independent look at Britain and saying that that's not credible. So I think, you've, as I say, on the one hand, this is kind of my point. You've got the parties promising tax cuts. You've got virtually every single public service in crisis, and you've got, billionaires. Their wealth is like that, while the tax burden on them is huge government.
You've still got the government supporting a huge state as well, right? So it goes both ways. You can't just look and go, the evil billionaires have got all the money, and that needs to be
right. And I think we need to take that sort of
you've got to have a balanced view, and that isn't a balanced view to just say let's take it off of them and then give it to us.
Talking about balance, what you need to do, nobody really understands percentages. What you need to do is say, this is how much different things cost to achieve a certain level. This is what it means in terms of your tax money. So it's actually about communication, isn't it?
100%.
If you tell 100%, it's a lot of tax. But if you tell people, if you tell people where your money is going for, you're easier to persuade them on that sort of basis.
When you do a percentage and you say a percentage of GDP, it desensitises how much money you're actually spending. So what you actually need to look at budgeting in a much different way than a percentage of GDP. And you need to get the other countries to come and also, get involved with NATO.
Well, that's a very
we are doing our bit. We need to do
of the
more,
world, and that's
but then
expensive.
you need to go out and push those things.
Sorry, I was just going to say, this article, which was in the Telegraph this week, talks about what would happen in the event of a war, and it's very sobering reading indeed, about metro stations or underground stations used as air raid shelters, key bridges dynamited. We'd have actually no infrastructure. You might only bring things in by Eurostar through the tunnel, for example. We don't have any manufacturing in this country. Look what we're doing in Port Talbot. What are we doing? We're decimating decimating our industry for the sake of this peg of net zero. Isn't that bonkers?
Well, again,
is it bonkers?
Well, I think getting to net zero and prevent. I think if you look at every objective study, no, it's a no. Every objective study of climate change says it's going to make a lot of these problems elsewhere. But it is a security issue. That's the key thing.
Hang on a minute.
I mean,
if we don't have blast furnaces, we can't create steel. We need steel.
Well, again, I think we should be looking at greener ways to make steel. But I do completely agree that we should be supporting our industry. But I think it's a false choice to make it a choice between that and between our climate objectives.
But because you look at the countries that oppose us.
Just one sec. So many of the problems in the in parts of the world that are where real security threats to Britain are originating, it comes from things that are climate related and that are getting worse because of climate change. So I think we absolutely need to defend our manufacturing, but we also need to make sure that we prevent climate change from getting out of control, because that's only going to make our security issues miles worse.
The climate has nothing to do with foreign aggressors like Russia.
Yeah.
It has nothing
and how much
to do
they care?
with terrorism. It has nothing to do with any of that.
Well, it does actually, because it exacerbates poverty, instability in parts of the world that are already poor and unstable, and it drives people into the arms of these terrorists. That's not to sort of excuse it, but it's just the fact that places that are poorer and are having bigger socio-economic problems are more likely to become volatile and dangerous.
So what people need are more informed discussions, because what happens is the rhetoric and the extremism just switches people off. So what you need to do is say, have an informed discussion. These are the consequences of these actions, and then people can make an informed decision.
Let me just ask you, Luke, there's also a lot of talk about having a citizen army. We talked about this national service before my father went into national service. I'm too young to know national service. But also, there's also this new scheme. Again, this is from Patrick Sanders, the General Staff Chief of General Staff. He said that gap year students should be paid to undergo some form of military training. So after school, you go in for a bit of military training, you get a taste of it, you understand camaraderie, you get some sort of sense of rules and discipline, and maybe that's a brilliant idea.
I actually quite like the idea, and I'll tell you why. Is because I think society is becoming very, very glass-like. And what I mean by that is everybody's very sensitive. I think discipline, focus, and actually the things that, I've not been in the military, I'll be clear about that, but it does bring a sense of discipline and focus to people, and if they're going to get paid to do it and they're willing to do it, it could be a really good idea, and it could really, give some good principles and foundations to young people in this country.
Principle is important.
Principles and foundations.
You need to get the idea of society and community back. Discipline is also important, and so on and so on. When I was growing up, we had CCF, Combined Cadet Forces, at school. You had the itchy trousers on a Monday and marched up and down meaninglessly, but that's what you had. The idea of discipline and understanding that you can assist people is got to be good. It also helps people prepare for other aspects in life, because getting organised and having what we talked about, a purpose, has got to be important.
Luke?
Yeah, I think it sounds quite a good idea. I think it'd be, as Adam says, I think it would be a good sort of way of instilling some decent values into young people. My caveat, I guess, would be a bunch of 19-year-olds scraped off the couch for a month of training. I don't think that's going to have Vladimir Putin quaking in his boots. And also, I'd come back to the point I keep making. They're obviously saying they're going to be paid for this. We're going to have to find the money from somewhere. I know we're going to sort of disagree on this. I'll just come back to my point about a quarter of the wealth in the country being held by 1% of the population. Okay. You could tax them a little bit more. While protecting,
don't they then?
So look, you could tax them a little bit more, and they'd still be extremely
so investment
rich.
Creates a return. So, if you invest in unproductive members of society, you give them discipline, focus, and values. That's where the money will come back, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Because they're going to produce for the economy further on.
But one more thing.
We're in complete agreement. I think I agree that investing in people would be good for them.
But those high earners tend to employ people. Let's say, and if you overtax them, they leave the country.
Exactly. Again, the evidence on on this is very thin. You look at the reforms. No, it is. You look at the reforms to non-dom status.
The non-dom tax will drive people out of this country.
It has the reforms to it. The number of people that left was tiny compared to the tax revenue it generated. Norway introduced a wealth. Norway introduced a wealth tax, and a few people did leave. But they'd have needed 15 times as many people to have left for it to have discounted the money that it raised. It was a real revenue generator. Look, I absolutely think that people should be rewarded for success and for starting businesses and stuff. I'm just saying that we need, security. We need no.
So
I think people should be. We need good public services.
Yes.
And
the bottom line is
reward success.
People that build businesses create wealth, and they employ people, which stimulates the economy.
Exactly.
And economic growth is stimulated through business, and the people that have got the creativity, the work ethic, and put the time and effort into doing that should be rewarded.
So can I ask you one simple question? One simple question. Very, very simple question. So if you're saying that it's wrong on those statistics, people leave. If it were true, and we can find evidence, would you then say that it is wrong to do it?
I'd then say that we need to have international coordination to ensure we can get a sort of fair and meaningful tax contribution. I think yes, we need great public services that we need to, and that we could be getting a more meaningful tax contribution from people who, even after they pay tax, would still be incredibly rich and well rewarded for success, as they should be.
The last thing I want is international coordination. The whole point of Brexit was to devolve ourselves, so we set our own rules, we set our own tax, and we have our own vision for the world.
We're in a global economy, and
we may well be, but then we need to undercut. We attract the best and the brightest.
We're always going to be affected by what other countries are doing, so we do have to work with them on things like the global economy, security,
I think you're really underestimating how much tax that people pay in terms of that are running businesses. You've got corporation tax, NI, PAYE, VAT. You're taxed on absolutely everything, and if you squeeze it too much, you're not going to allow people to evolve and create that economic stimulus.
But everybody is taxed a lot. I'm sure we all pay a lot of tax around it. And I clarify, I'm not talking about a small business owner who works hard and is really successful. I'm talking about plutocrats, billionaires, oligarchs who are worth billions and would still be worth billions even after paying a bit more tax.
I need to pause you. Just have a breath whilst we take a break. I've just got some breaking news for you. One person is seriously injured after 3 people have been stabbed at a railway station in Paris. So one person seriously injured, 3 stabbed at a railway station in Paris. We'll bring you more on that as and when we get it. We're going to continue with this conversation after the break. I want to also talk about what's going on with our asylum system. Abdul Ezedi, he was granted asylum after failing it twice. What on earth is going on in this country? This is Talk TV. Back to Talk Today with me, David Bull. The time 8:47 now on Saturday, February the 3rd. That breaking news again, one person is seriously injured. 3 people have been stabbed at a railway station in Paris. We'll bring you more on that as and when we get it. Lots of messages coming in about our conversation. Gaza in Yorkshire, good morning to you. Gaza says, Lou, you're blind to the facts. So Port Talbot and all those people lose their jobs so a foreign country and a government can make the same product and ship it back to us. And Luke, you'd say you're an entrepreneur. This country has sold off its industry to the lowest bidder to import everything we need, and they're bothered about a 1% contribution to global warming. I'll let you answer that because it's.
No, but I agree. We should be defending the Port Talbot steelworks. Sorry, I'm just saying that blaming net zero efforts.
1% of global emissions from here.
Well, every country's there's nearly 1%. 200. That's actually an outsized share compared to our share of the population. But every country forms quite a small proportion of total emissions. But we've all got to bring them down.
Okay. This is a great idea. Let's get the Chinese to produce our steel, a potential enemy producing our steel. Thank you very much indeed. This country, Mick says, will not be safe whilst the civil service, police, church and BBC are run by lefty political bias bosses. And this also says, how do we defend the country when we have thousands of unknown military-aged men crossing the channel supported by the left and the church? And this goes back to Abdul Ezedi. Now, I did this story yesterday on the show, but, this is... I what is going on in the Home Office? So you've got this man who comes here illegally on the back of a lorry from Afghanistan, applies for asylum, by the way, commits a sexual offence, turned down twice, then gets given asylum, and now, obviously, he then commits this atrocity. It's not fit for purpose.
Well, there needs to be much more stringent checks and better decision making, right? If it's been refused and it's been refused twice, then it needs to be followed through, right? I think that the way that he stayed in the country was a priest supported him and said that he'd changed his religion
to Christianity.
I mean, but that, I don't understand how that instantly makes you a good person. And it's not about asylum, and what it's about is if you are going to commit crime in this country and you are going to do heinous things and horrible things, then you shouldn't be here, and we should be stringent about
and it goes back to communication, as we always say. People need to have clarity as to what the rules are, because not all asylum seekers are wrong, which it's not about that. It's people who abuse the system. Go for the rules.
Let the rules say where a person is required to sign the sex offenders register, you must refuse or cancel entry clearance or permission on the grounds of serious harm. That is the guidance.
So very simple. So it should be revoked.
So it should be revoked.
Very simple.
But you see, this is why people have lost faith in what is going on in this country.
So you're right. So the distinction is, because a lot of people have a go on social media and say, oh, we're all talking about asylum. It's important to talk about the abuses. And where those abuses happen, let's call it out and get it rectified.
I agree. Just in terms of that, I mean, it comes back to a much bigger issue. We know that the immigration will be, and I keep saying it will be, I think, the predominant theme of the general election. But also, we've now got 1,000 people who've come here illegally this year already. Rishi Sunak says he's going to stop the boats. Suella Braverman has used this to say we need to leave the ECHR. And here we've got the Safety of Rwanda bill going through. We're in the House of Lords. We're in the committee stage. It will go through, won't it?
I wouldn't know, to be honest. I think it's a plan that's had a lot of controversy, to say the least. I mean, as a sort of liberal kind of lefty type, I'll say something that will hopefully ingratiate me a little bit more with the
our audience love you.
With the audience, in that processing people seeking to immigrate here in a third country doesn't seem the most sort of unreasonable project in the world. I do think we need to make sure that they're treated humanely and the process is done properly. But obviously, it's the politics around it is really complicated at the moment. And again, I would say, we were talking earlier about international coordination and stuff. Yeah, again, immigration. These are the immigration sort of trails extend across continents, multiple countries. We do need to be working with other countries on this. So it's an example of how we are integrated into a global economy, and we do need sort of multinational structures and partnerships as well.
I also think it devalues the audience at home just saying it's left or right. I think the reality is give people the facts and they can make informed decisions and encourage all views. That's what we try and do.
The fact is that person shouldn't have been in the country when that crime was committed.
It was an abuse.
And it's got nothing to do with asylum. Well, it has got to do with asylum. It shouldn't have been in the country because he broke the rules in terms of what we should be here and shouldn't be here. That's it.
OK, thank you very much indeed, both of you. Luke Hildyard, Director of the High Pay Centre, and Adam Stott, entrepreneur and business coach. And that was today's Head to Head.
Head to Head.
Let's take some calls now. Aaron is in sunny Blackpool. Good morning.
Hello there, how are you doing?
Yeah, good, thanks very much indeed. What are your thoughts this morning?
Oh, right, okay, yeah. So, obviously the whole country is shocked about what happened to that poor girl. You mentioned earlier on this morning about possibly kind of, what are my thoughts on bringing back the death penalty, and I actually support the fact. Now, I'm not saying you could use it every time there is, like, a murder, but I would say that in rare circumstances, there are cases like this that is just horrendous. And I don't think any number of years is enough to change a person. I've heard that they had no remorse in the courtroom, there was just no emotions. For me, lepers don't change their spots. And when they're out, say, possibly at 38, 40, the possibility of them doing it again could be quite high. You know, I do support death penalty. I really do. Life for life.
I wonder what your take is on that.
I think the problem is that sometimes you get it wrong. And not in this particular... If somebody is wrongly convicted...
Let's stick with this case, though,
Yeah,
because Aaron,
yeah. That's not what I'm saying. You know, when you said that sometimes you get it wrong, in their circumstances, they have not got it wrong. The evidence was there. They found letters in their rooms. They found a knife. The DNA was linked to him. The DNA was on him. You know, the evidence is there. So what I'm saying is a death penalty should be there if they've stone-baked concrete evidence that they have done it. And they have, so death penalty should adhere to them.
Would you apply that to all people convicted of murder?
No. What I would say is the people that are convicted of murder through circumstantial evidence, so there's not actually caught on CCTV doing it, there's no DNA linkage, but they have been caught circumstantially, so they have done it, but they cannot actually prove it concretely, then no, they should be given a sentence. But people that have been caught, linked, DNA, CCTV, stone-baked on concrete, they have done it, no way out of it, death penalty.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? There were very, very detailed psychiatric assessments done on both of these. They seem to have some complex psychiatric symptoms or some underlying psychiatric illnesses. Interestingly, the Justice, Mrs. Justice, said that actually that was not a mitigating factor in this.
Yeah, absolutely. And that they look at all those sort of things. And I say this is the problem with the media. We get the headlines, even though it's 47 minutes in the sentencing. There's lots and lots of evidence that you have to look at. The difficulty with the death penalty, and it's you have to say, well, do we have a faith in the legal system? What your brilliant caller is saying is that if they are murder, but there's circumstantial evidence, an element of doubt, you have to trust the legal system to say, well, the jury has to decide beyond reasonable doubt.
But Aaron's right in this case, isn't he?
What, that you should have the death penalty? I disagree with the death penalty.
Okay.
For all sorts of reasons.
Aaron, thank you so much indeed for your call. Let's squeeze in Russell from the West Midlands. Good morning.
Good morning, David. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thanks very much indeed. So, your thoughts this morning?
Oh yeah, I'm personally 100% for it. This might not be a very, very popular opinion, but this is where I stand. Like that girl that was stabbed, my belief is that the people that did that should have exactly the same implemented upon them. So if she was stabbed 26 times, I'd personally bring them out. I'd put them in jail for a while, a very, almost like a castle kind of thing. Then bring them out on a Saturday afternoon. And if they stab someone 26 times...
Yeah, let's not go graphic. I mean, we're going back, aren't we, to medieval times and hanging and public humiliation. I mean, in many ways, look, they were under 16 at the time, and in 22 years they will be a lot older. They also have 22 years or 20 years to reflect on what they've done.
Well, that's fine. They can reflect for 20 years, and then at the end of 20 years and one day, you can say goodbye to them.
Russell, a very strong call indeed. I mean, I think what you have seen is the outrage from...
and I understand that outrage, and absolutely. And there are three elements to punishment at the moment. It's about punishing the person for the crime that they've done. It's about a deterrent for other people. But also the idea of the sentencing people going in prison is to try and reform those people. Now, obviously, if the death penalty is there, you're never going to reform them on that sort of basis. It is that gut reaction. When you hear about these abhorrent crimes, you want to get revenge. And I understand that, but for the other reasons, I don't support.
What were your thoughts on the death penalty that was implemented in the States using nitrogen?
I think, for the reasons I've mentioned, I think it's wrong. I think the death penalty, if you've got to work out why are people punished, it's a deterrent. Well, you can have a look at the stats. We need to work that out. And certain countries which have, or if you take people's hands off for stealing, or you do certain other bits and pieces, those crimes go down. So from a deterrent point of view, there's there.
So you're not advocating chopping people's hands off?
No, I'm not. But I'm saying the deterrent, though. But it's the deterrent, the punishment, and also the reformation. The idea about society is you want to reform people to get back into it. So are you turning around and saying we want to get rid of the third element, in which case you just have the first two, then it's a different proposition.
But then also, and going back to Luke's point, which is from head to head, he was saying that you need to invest and we don't have enough prison places.
Well, I think we need to look at the whole page and get the facts right, and I've asked him to share some information so we can check that. Never let the truth stand in the the way of a good story. But let's
now,
get those facts.
Now, Andrew, back in your box. Back in your box. We'll take a break now. After the break, we're going to be talking about Northern Ireland, because devolved government is going to be restored today after 2 years of not having an assembly in Northern Ireland. It's big, big news. I want to know, actually, what this deal is. Does it fulfil all of the DUP's red lines? I'll be joined by Gregory Campbell, who's a DUP MP for East Londonderry, after this break. This is Talk TV, broadcasting from London.
This is Talk TV.